You know you're really going on too long when even your computer tells you to stop. Okay, so what I was trying to say is about the reading. Um, I put in chapter 13 from the textbook for those of you who don't have the textbook. And I'd like you to look especially at pages 318 to 323, which talk about the idea of planned obsolescence and the sort of issue or problem around product styling. Um, what I'd like you to do in thinking about it is really kind of connect the dots for yourself between this issue of product styling and consumer culture and the quick fashion cycle and the rise of the maker movement. You'll see that Susie Elliott and Mark Richardson sort of talk generally about why people might make things themselves in response to a culture in which they feel increasingly alienated from products that are just changing all the time based on seemingly the dictates of fashion. So I think that maker movement piece is a good one. And from there, I'd like you to think about two examples. So once you've kind of wrapped your mind around the product styling and then this transition to the maker movement, the David Doris piece is about these sort of scrap textiles. There are various kinds of cast-offs that are bulk shipped, in this case to Nigeria, and he talks about how these textiles are adapted for the local market. It's a pretty fascinating example. And he uses, why is this not working? Okay, these are some of examples. There's lots of great illustrations in his article talking about how these textiles are reused. So that's one example that I'm hoping you're going to think about. And I want to remind you that when in week 3 we talked about sort of the tin can city, the informal city that is put together out of whatever local materials are available. So this is from a very large area in the capital city of Tunisia that is full of self-built structures with sort of scavenged materials. And we talked about these as examples of bricolage. And you might remember we also talked about people making their own soccer balls out of whatever materials are available, so that they can play the sport and enjoy the sport, even though they don't have access to like the regulation equipment. So I'd like you to think about what is the connection between DIY and bricolage. How are these different? How are these the same? Use the example given in Doris to help you think this through. And that's obviously sort of thinking about it in an unfamiliar way. Then I'd like you to think about it in a more familiar way in a US context. So I've been joking all semester about artisanal pickles. So here we have some artisanal pickles illustrated on the left. And on the right, the sort of crafter driven pussy hat demonstration on the right. So these are some examples of sort of DIY craft, artisanal culture, this kind of resurgence of the maker movement that they are talking about in that essay. I'd like you to consider a new example, which is a piece that ran in the Globe either yesterday or the day before, in which they're explicitly using the language of DIY and the maker movement to talk about this ability of crafters to sew masks, even potentially in bulk. So I'd like you to think about that example. It's obviously a very current example. So look at the discussion prompt online. But basically what you have is sort of a more theoretical sense of what the maker movement is. in the article from Elliott and Richardson. The story of design, starting on page 318, will give you some sense of like sort of how we got here, maybe. I've put the module for week 3 back up at the top of the page, so it's easy to access if you want to go back and look at the bricolage material or think about that again in regard to the Doris article. And then I really want to recommend that at some point, if not right away, you look at the piece about this new aesthetic of DIY materials. I think you'll find it really inspiring and interesting. So take a look at that as well. And as always, you can email me if you have any questions or concerns or problems about this as you're doing it. All right, thanks everybody.